Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Final Years of Augustus, Betrayals, Revolts, and the Last Heirs by Kings and Generals. This is another episode in their series on the reign of Augustus. Last time we saw how Drusus, one of Augustus's stepsons, launched a series of successful campaigns in Germania. This led to him becoming one of the most popular political figures within Rome. It appeared like maybe he would be selected as Augustus's heir, but unfortunately he died before his time in a really unfortunate accident. Now with Drusus gone, Augustus needs to find who will succeed him. Now Augustus has many years to go, but judging from the title, we're going to be talking about the remainder of his time as emperor. So a lot of really fascinating stuff to cover. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
In the beginning of the year 8 BCE, Augustus once again crossed the Pomerium into Rome, approaching the Senate and accepting his proconsular imperium with another reluctant performance.
Highlight the word performance there. Was Augustus really reluctant? No, of course he wasn't, but he had to pretend to be so that everybody else could continue to believe, or pretend to believe, that Rome was not a state ruled by a single authoritarian.
The death of Drusus had left Augustus despondent. His long life was a blessing for its time, but one that saw the death of his sons, his supporters, and his friends.
Right.
Of those that
and let's see the two that just vanished there.
But one that saw the death of...
So we can see here, as they're talking, Augustus lived a long life and ruled for a long time, especially for the era. And that meant Augustus was constantly looking for who would succeed him, because of course Augustus didn't know how long he would live. I mean, he didn't know that at this point he still had, years and years to go. As far as he was concerned, I mean, he could really go at any moment. And so he's looking for people who will succeed him, right? Agrippa, right? Agrippa was always Augustus's right-hand man. Drusus, who we saw last time, Drusus was a rising star in the Roman political scene, a very popular general. Drusus is gone as well. And so now we have these three on the bottom. Although there is someone else we've yet to talk about, but we'll get to them at some point.
His supporters and his friends. Of those that remained were his stepsons and adopted children, Tiberius.
Right, and of course, worth noting that, it's interesting. I talked about this last time, how oftentimes when we think of sort of imperial families or royal families, now I know Augustus wasn't a king, but he was an emperor, even if he wouldn't have admitted it. So when we think of imperial families, we often think of, things being passed down by blood. It is maybe less to do with blood relation with Augustus, but you do need to be part of the family or close to the family, right? You need to be related in some way. Maybe not by blood, but related in some way. That is important. And just to jump in here and make something clear, Lucius and Gaius are blood related to Augustus. They are his grandsons. I should have been a little more clear on that. I think what I'm trying to say is that Augustus doesn't have any biological sons in the running, right? He's got adoptive sons, he's got stepsons, but Gaius and Lucius, they are actually blood related to him. It's just that, as we can see, being blood related, biologically related to Augustus, was really not the only or really the main thing he was looking for. He was looking for someone in his family who was competent, right? That was it. So just to clarify, those two are his grandsons. They are blood related. They're just not his biological sons. Anyway, back to the video.
A stern and boorish disciplinarian, as well as Gaius and Lucius Caesar, two spoiled and untested children. Left with no other heirs, it would be these three unlikely candidates who would take on Augustus's mantle in the provinces.
Yeah, so as you might be able to tell from the description of those three, Augustus was not super thrilled with his options at this point.
Welcome to our latest video on the Julio-Claudian dynasty of Rome. in which we will cover the twilight years of Rome's first emperor and his response to crises on the vast frontiers of his empire, from Judea to Armenia to Germania. Every week, we release 3 new exclusive videos.
And I'll have their video linked down below so you can go and check them out as they go through their advertisement here. And I imagine we'll touch on the Teutoburg Forest in this video, but there's going to be an entire video later in this series on the Teutoburg Forest. So we're talking about the rest of Augustus's reign, but we're going to go back and cover a lot of this stuff in more depth.
Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters.
And hey, become a member on this channel as well while you're at it.
Despite Drusus's sudden death, the majority of the Germanic world saw fit to maintain peace with the Romans. Tiberius, now the only man Augustus could truly rely on, was sent north to the Rhine.
You can see here Tiberius was born the elder of Drusus in 42 BC to Livia and Tiberius Claudius Nero. So Tiberius was brother to Drusus and stepson to Augustus. Like Drusus, he was also embraced by Augustus upon his marriage to Livia. That is true, but unlike Drusus, Tiberius and Augustus will have a bit more of a contentious relationship, especially when you remember that Augustus still has years to go. Now, look, we know that Tiberius will end up being emperor, but, and you know, it's interesting because at this moment, especially as you go forward, Tiberius is at once the most obvious choice and also an unlikely choice. What do I mean by that? Well, he's the most obvious choice because he's really the most senior heir that Augustus has. He's Augustus's stepson. Drusus is gone. You've got Tiberius. That makes him an obvious choice. But him and Augustus had a shaky relationship. That relationship would get pretty bad at times. Augustus, I think, preferred some other options at various times, like Drusus. So in that sense, it makes Tiberius not the obvious choice. So definitely an interesting figure. I do wonder if we'll talk about Germanicus as well, who is the son of Drusus.
While Augustus himself presided over a massive conference consisting of envoys from every tribe in the Romans' newly acquired province of Germania. There was but one exception, the Sicambri, who the Romans required to be present and part of the negotiations, and whose diplomats were sent late to the symposium. With none of his old Republican companions to assuage his fury, Augustus ordered the late arrivals imprisoned and the Sicambri's hostages killed in response. Now in a state of war, Tiberius led the army across the Weser and subdued the Sicambri once more, capturing their king Melo. However, the Roman punishment seems to have been conciliatory. The Sicambri finally received the conditions they had originally sought, and 40,000 of them were resettled on the Roman side of the Rhine in Belgica.
Right, which is what they wanted. I mean, remember, a lot of this began because some of these Germanic tribes wanted to settle or partially settle in Roman territory, right? They wanted more land. We talked about all of that last time. Now, of course, a lot of this gets really out of hand, and eventually there's a lot more at play than just the ability to migrate, but that was one of the sort of beginning factors.
More than that, Tiberius proved his competence as an organizer and logistician, making various moves to consolidate Roman power in Germania.
Yeah, and that's probably a good way to describe Tiberius. Tiberius gets a lot of flack, a lot of it deserved, mainly due to his time as emperor, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about him under Augustus. And look, Tiberius, he was never known to be the most fantastic or stunning general, but he was known to be competent. He was good at logistics. He was good at planning out campaigns. He was known to be a somewhat cautious, sensible type of military leader. And not to say, well, I'm obviously not saying he was perfect, but, you know, don't let, if you're familiar with Tiberius, don't let your negative opinion of him later in life influence your opinion of him here. I would say he was a pretty competent general who showed that at various times, once again, not without mistakes, but he does pretty much know what he's doing, and he's definitely good at the more logistical and planning side of running a campaign.
He abandoned the forward operating base of Oberaden and re-established it at Haltern, where supplies and reinforcements could be dispatched more quickly from the Rhine. Having secured a lasting peace with a cautious, conciliatory, but effective strategy on the Rhine, Augustus lauded his stepson.
And yeah, Tiberius's military campaigns would be best described, I think, as cautious but effective.
Tiberius was allowed to be acclaimed imperator alongside Augustus, and granted a triumph in Rome, and
just like Drusus. But of course, Drusus is now gone.
Designated consul for the following year. Unfortunately for Augustus, Tiberius's ambitions were about to take a counterproductive turn. The next year proved to be uneventful, but for a brief sojourn by Tiberius in Germania, of which the details are lost. Such a quiet year proved beneficial for Augustus's image. Tiberius had promised to restore the Temple of Concord, so Drusus's name could be inscribed upon it.
Right.
And Augustus was able to close the doors of the Temple of Janus for a third time.
There you go. Augustus wants to show the people that he can bring peace, right? There's been a lot of campaigning throughout his time reigning over the empire. He wants to show I can bring an era of peace and prosperity, and that nod to Drusus there, as was mentioned in the last episode. Drusus was an incredibly popular general and even political leader among the people and politicians of Rome. Everybody really liked the guy, so it was definitely in their best interest to honor Drusus. Not to mention that Augustus seems to have legitimately liked Drusus, both personally and, more or less importantly, you can decide. Augustus really seemed to think that Drusus would have been a fantastic heir and successor. So Augustus himself was pretty upset when Drusus died, so I'm sure he personally wanted to honor him as well. Not to mention, that was Tiberius' brother, of course.
Having proven himself reliable time and again in Raetia, Illyricum, and Germania, Augustus renewed Tiberius' tribunician power for another 5 years and ordered him to Armenia. Trouble on Rome's eastern border was brewing, as the...
So, I mean, we sort of see here with Tiberius so far that Drusus sort of rose really quickly. He got all these honors heaped on him. It was never, like, super official, but it seems that, you know, Drusus was the one who Augustus was leaning towards. He didn't live long enough for Augustus to really make it official, but now that Drusus is gone, Augustus sort of turns slowly back towards Tiberius, like, hey, man, would you like some of those honors too? I know I, maybe spurned you a little bit for your brother, but you're not that bad, Tiberius.
Armenian king, Tigranes III, had died and had been replaced by a Parthian puppet, Tigranes IV. Before he could depart for Armenia, Tiberius made a sudden decision to retire from public life, which Augustus forbade in a show before the Senate.
Yeah.
Tiberius went on a hunger strike for 4 days before Augustus ultimately acquiesced.
So, I mean, this is when things get bad between them, as you could maybe imagine from the scene that was just laid out, right? And all this time, if you're sort of unfamiliar with the story, I've been saying, oh, well, Augustus and Tiberius, their relationship has low points. You might have been thinking, well, things seem pretty well so far. Yeah, we're hitting a low point, all right? Things are not going to go so well for these two following from this point. Now, it also might seem like a sudden decision, and I don't know what specifically informed Tiberius' decision, but I'll say, and maybe this is reading too far ahead, but Tiberius, whether now or especially as emperor, was known to be someone who didn't really like having this position. He didn't like having all this authority. I think he definitely felt it more as a burden than as privilege or responsibility, right? I'm not sure he was really interested in a lot of the things he was expected to do. And so, he'd do this as emperor. And as emperor, he became sort of increasingly isolated and not to mention cruel over time, right? And we can see here, I think Tiberius sort of just wants to pull back and be like, I just want to isolate myself. I'm not really interested in all of this. I would just like to live in luxury and peace on my own, not have to deal with all these problems. So it seems to me that's part of what's happening here, and that would continue to be a concern for him through the rest of his life and during his time as emperor, which was one of the various things that made him not a great emperor.
Tiberius went on a hunger strike for 4 days before Augustus ultimately acquiesced and allowed him to retire to Rhodes with his astrologer Thrasyllus. Ancient and modern scholars have no certain explanation for Tiberius's decision.
Right, and that's why I say we don't know exactly what informed his decision. I was just giving a bit of my thinking there.
With claims ranging from resenting the preferential treatment of Lucius and Gaius Caesar to wanting to escape his wife Julia's conduct and reputation without the disgrace of a divorce.
Yeah, that was part of it too, or may have been part of it. The affairs of this family, both affairs in the broader sense and sometimes literal affairs, were very much known among the people and the politicians back in Rome. This was the imperial family of the empire, if not officially, then definitely unofficially. So everybody knew what was happening. They knew things were not going swimmingly between these two.
Whatever the case, Augustus was left feeling betrayed and alone.
Yeah.
His ally and staunch Republican Maecenas had perished 2 years prior, and Statilius Taurus was ailing in his advanced age. He also faced a shortage of competent military commanders.
So, a lot of these guys who have been with him for a long time, like Agrippa and Maecenas, they're dying, right? I mean, it's a blessing to live as long as Augustus did, but that blessing comes with negatives, and one of those, which is really, it's quite sad just on a human level, is that you are going to live to see a lot of your old friends and family pass away. And that's what Augustus is living through. So a lot of his old comrades are gone, and his family members, they're either dying like Drusus, or they're not fit for the job like Tiberius. That's how Augustus sees it. He feels betrayed. He's not sure why Tiberius has done what he's done, and we're not entirely sure either. And now Augustus is kind of like, damn, what do I do now? I'm left without a lot of reliable people surrounding me. Especially in the department of finding an heir. But even outside of that, he's looking for people to help run his damn empire.
Having been forced to reduce the length of the consulship through voluntary resignations of each appointee in order to create more qualified men for service as...
Right, and we're seeing here, consulship was reduced from 1 year to 6 months. By the end of Augustus's reign, it was reduced to 4, allowing 6 consuls per year. And so the point behind that is that the consulship, once an important, one of the most powerful aside from, say, dictatorship, but on the regular, the most powerful office in Roman political life, is now essentially something to be handed out. And so you make it shorter so that each year you can give that honor to more people. Now you've lessened everything about the office, but what that tells us that Augustus has continued to shorten it is that he clearly needs more qualified men. He's running out of people. And so he needs to give the consulship to more people so that, 1, he can win their favor, and 2, he can qualify them in the most sort of official sense to do a bunch of jobs, right? So he needs more people, clearly.
Military and administrative legati. He was forced to turn to his teenage grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, and hoped they would prove capable of performing the tasks and responsibilities before them.
And that's where Augustus is at this point. Drusus, who seemed a sure success, though who knows what would have happened if he'd survived, he's gone. Tiberius, who was sort of uncertain, but okay, he's gone. He's self-isolated. He's sort of imposed exile upon himself. Now Augustus is like, okay, I gotta roll the dice. Let's see if these two are any good.
Gaius Caesar had already experienced conditions in the field while serving under Tiberius in 8 BCE, albeit he had no command experience. In 5 BCE, Gaius finally turned 15 and entered the age of manhood, donning the toga virilis and being appointed to the honorific post of Princeps Ioventutis, or First of the Youth. This post placed him in charge of one of the 4 termae of youths, and required him to prepare them for the Transfectio Equitum display, giving him badly needed experience in horsemanship, logistics, and leadership.
Yeah.
Hopefully it would propel him on a course to become an effective military commander.
And, that can be one of these issues when you're living in this sort of pampered palace life, is that you don't get the military experience you might otherwise need. When you look at Roman politics of this era, and by this era I really mean Julius Caesar all the way through to now, who's been dominating politics? Successful generals, right? Well, you need to build up that experience. That can be difficult if you're someone like Gaius, though it is worth mentioning that Augustus himself was never a successful general. I mean, I know he's had lots of military honors heaped upon him, but, he mostly had other guys doing the planning and fighting for him, like Agrippa. And so Augustus, he's an example of somebody who made a name for himself. It still involved military success, but that was not really the main thing he was good at. So it's possible, but it doesn't change the fact that military success was a big part of being a successful leader and politician in Rome.
In the interim, Augustus had to rely on his legati to handle developments on the eastern frontier. Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, Legatus Augusti pro praetore of Galatia and Pamphylia, was tasked to lead 2 legions against major banditry in central Anatolia. An established but reliable legatus named Publius Quinctilius Varus was then in charge of Syria when King Herod died in 4 BCE. A well-known figure even in the modern day, Herod had been the model of a Roman client king, but the terms of his will proved to be inflammatory to the regions of Judea and Palestina. Herod had left vast sums of cash reserves at multiple temples and palaces across his realm, a significant portion of which he bequeathed to the Romans. This did not sit well with the Jews and other indigenous Palestinians.
Yeah, you might have heard of Herod if you've ever heard of, I don't know, the Bible or Christianity or Judaism. Of course, these religions are very much tied up in what's happening here. I mean, Judaism especially, but of course, it's 4 BCE. We're very much seeing the origins of Christianity. I don't think we'll talk about it that much in this series, because it's something that's more important sort of in retrospect than it maybe was at the time. Just to say that sort of emergence of Jesus and Christianity was not some massive empire-changing event in the moment. It was something that had a big impact, over the course of hundreds of years. But anyway, all of this very much ties up with the Abrahamic religions,
who viewed the Roman acquisition of these sums as the looting of their cities and wealth. Herod Archelaus, his son and primary successor, faced riots almost immediately upon his accession to the post of Tetrarch. As the crowds grew in number over the course of Passover, Herod Archelaus attempted to have the local Roman tribune, with his cohort of auxiliaries, subdue the crowd without bloodshed. But the rioters pelted and killed the soldiers with stones, forcing Herod and the Romans to flee.
Subdue that crowd without bloodshed, and how exactly is that going to happen?
Instead, he returned with his army and slaughtered the rioters, temporarily quelling the unrest, but setting the stage for escalated violence. Herod Archelaus sent for the assistance of Varus, who was accompanied to Herod's new port of Caesarea by Procurator of Syria Sabinus, who sought to recover the amassed stores of wealth Herod had bequeathed to Augustus. Varus moved quickly to Jerusalem, where he garrisoned the legion he had brought from Syria and restored order. After Varus returned to Antioch, Sabinus proceeded to the city against Varus's instructions and attempted to pry open the doors of the city treasuries in the palace and temple. Incensed by his actions, the populace from towns around Jerusalem came to the city to join in the riots, leading to a fight in the temple between the Romans and the dissidents. Sabinus directed his men from the tallest of the city's defensive towers, who began to slaughter the crowd. The locals were outmatched, but they managed to outmaneuver the Romans instead, hurling stones and javelins from the temple's upper levels and lighting fires in surrounding buildings. Many citizens and Roman soldiers were trapped and died in the ensuing blaze, and the crowd laid siege to the city with the help of defectors from Herod Archelaus' army. Sabinus, the Romans, and the core of Herod's army were trapped, and messengers...
Wow, that's a pretty incredible feat from the local populace. I mean, you were up against Herod and this Roman contingent. These are a very scary, well-trained, well-armed force, and the local populace, plus deserters, as they pointed out, are actually putting up an impressive effort here.
Were rushed to Varus for aid. Revolts erupted across the province. At Idumea, 2,000 of Herod's veterans reformed their unit and attacked Archelaus' army. Eudes, the son of a notorious bandit named Hezekias, broke into the armory at Sepphoris and looted its stores, attacking loyalists across the region. At Perea and Emmaus, 2 men, named Simon and Anthrongeos, attempted to usurp the throne. Varus was incensed, amassing an army of 2 legions and 4 cavalry alae to put down the rebellion. En route, Varus picked up 1,500 veterans who voluntarily re-enlisted, and an additional force of Arabian allies under a certain Aretus. He split his forces, sending his commander Gaius to Sepphoris to raise the city and slay the bandits of Euodus. At the same time, Varus himself passed through the loyal city of Samaria and sent Aretus to raise the nearby village of Sampho. Varus proceeded to Emmaus to crush Athrongeus' usurpation, who ordered the town set ablaze. Turning towards Jerusalem, the rebels quickly dispersed into the mountains before his arrival, allowing Varus to relieve the beleaguered inhabitants. Rounding up the rioters, he placed most in his custody and crucified 2,000 of the most troublesome instigators. Despite his rapid success, the situation was not yet resolved, as a significant force of 10,000...
It was a pretty significant and brutal uprising, I have to say, and suppression. Varus has arrived, he's trying to put the thing down. There's a lot happening here at the moment, both sort of religiously, but also with Varus himself. Seeing this, you might think, okay, Varus is handling this. Certainly he's going to have a long and illustrious career. Think again. We'll see more of him later. Well, maybe later in this episode, but I know we'll see more of him later in this series.
Rebels were still operating at Idumea. Furthermore, the Arabians of Aretus were waging a private war of retribution against the locals in response to various injustices committed against them by the late Herod.
Oh, damn.
Varus recalled Aretus and sent his men into the countryside, offering mass clemency to all but the leaders of the revolt, who were shipped to Rome and tried before Augustus. Surprisingly, Augustus also showed mercy to all those who had not been members of Herod's family. The tumult was finally quelled, and Varus returned to Antioch with most of his forces.
A rare show of mercy for Augustus. Julius Caesar, Augustus's uncle and adopted father, he was pretty widely known for his mercy, which, I think you could argue was more a political ploy, but either way, he was merciful to his defeated enemies. Not always, actually. Let me clarify. He was merciful to his Roman defeated enemies. If you were a Gaul, he was typically not merciful. In fact, he was the opposite. Augustus, though, well, don't worry, he was consistent. He showed mercy almost no times, okay? Whether he was dealing with Romans or non-Romans, typically not a very merciful individual, though you could find certain cases of him being more merciful.
While 3 BCE was a quiet year, 2 BCE opened with a momentous and spontaneous accolade hoisted upon Augustus, when the Senate, led by Valeria Messala Messallinus, voted to grant him the appellation of Pater Patriae, or Father of the Fatherland.
Wow.
Augustus also held the consulship for the 13th time, continuing to rapidly cycle both distinguished families and novi homines through the consulship to keep the roster of eligible officers and administrators full.
Distinguished families and new men is what he's saying. So people who come from families who maybe were not involved in politics, they'd newly risen through the ranks, economically, politically. They're being introduced to politics, probably people who are very loyal to Augustus, along with these classic patrician families who Augustus wants to keep happy.
Augustus's other grandson, Lucius Caesar, also came of age that year. He was appointed Princeps Ioventutis and also made an augur, and was tasked with organizing the year's Lusus Troiae with Gaius Caesar, his brother. The massive Forum Augusti, one of Rome's most spectacular sites, was finally dedicated in this year, albeit it was not quite yet complete. Augustus and his grandsons presided over the opening ceremony and dedication of the military standards in the Temple of Mars Ultori, offering animal sacrifices and then hosting a massive display of games for the city's population in the Circus Flaminius, including a massive beast hunt, gladiatorial games, and a mock naval battle.
People love their games, alright? That's how you keep people happy. Bread and circuses, as the famous saying goes.
They ended with Gaius Caesar's departure for the Danube, where he was expected to learn to command Roman armies in the field. However, Cassius Dio remarks that Gaius learned little more than how to delegate command, showing no valor or competency himself. This was a serious problem for Augustus.
Yeah, for real. Though, I point out, in battle, Augustus also only knew how to delegate, but Augustus had skills in other areas, right? So, Gaius, if you're not going to be good at this whole warfare thing, you're going to need to be brilliant in some other way.
Tensions with Parthia were on the rise, and he needed serious, competent commanders who could meet the Parthian armies in battle and come out the other side. His thinly stretched government was about to be tested. In 1 BCE...
It's interesting... Not to pause again, sorry. But, it's interesting. You can sort of look at this through the frame of Augustus's personal issues and his family issues, but they're also framing this as an administrative problem, as in Rome, at this point, we've got the Roman Empire. Rome has transitioned, or is, I guess, sort of in the process of transitioning from the Republic to the Empire. It's definitely the Empire at this point, but the institutions, many of these Republican institutions do still exist. They're a shadow of their former selves, but what we're seeing here is that Augustus, what he's been trying to do, and we've seen this throughout the series, is transition Rome towards this new form of government. And so he's going to need new people, more people, different institutions, right? And he doesn't quite have all of that yet. And so that's sort of making governing this whole empire himself difficult. Now, of course, he doesn't truly govern it himself, right? There's of course delegating. There is power sharing with the Senate to a certain extent. But Augustus is so much more powerful than previous Roman leaders had been. He really is the one guy in charge, which is why we today call him emperor. This is sort of a new thing. There have been authoritarians in the past, but this is definitely different. And so what we're seeing as the empire, in effect, goes through this interesting, transitionary period.
Was about to be tested. In 1 BCE, a revolt instigated by the Parthians overthrew Artavasdes III and installed Tigranes IV, destabilizing the eastern frontier. Too old to lead armies in the field himself, and without Agrippa or Tiberius to impress upon the Parthians with their imposing presence, Augustus turned to his grandson, hoping it would have the same effect. Gaius Caesar was appointed Orienti Praepositus, and voted the former...
Okay, Tiberius is off, Agrippa's gone, Augustus is too old. Well, let's send Gaius in there. Drusus is dead. We don't have many options.
Tiberius's Proconsular Imperium by the Senate. He was also made consul designate for the next year, despite being significantly underaged for the position. In order to compensate for his military inexperience, several of Augustus's experienced commanders were sent with him to Armenia. Marcus Lollius and Publius Sulpicius Quirinius were to be his military attachés, and Lucius Aelius Sienus was sent with a detachment of the Praetorian Guard.
Right, and, maybe either of these two would have been better leading the campaign, and perhaps in effect that's sort of what they did, but at least on the face of it, Augustus needs someone from his family to be in charge, right? Because this is now an empire, this is an imperial family, and we see he needs people close to him, related to him, once again, not necessarily by blood, though it can be, he needs people related to him to be in those positions of power.
Arriving on the frontier in 1 CE, the Parthian king Phraticles dispatched envoys to Augustus with a letter to negotiate a settlement. However, Augustus and Phraticles' exchange proved hostile and unfruitful, full of passive-aggressive language and diplomatic slights. The peace negotiation instead took a different turn when the Parthians' candidate Artabazus suddenly became ill and died, prompting the Roman hostage Tigranes IV to petition Augustus.
And by the way, I should know, maybe slightly correct myself. It's not that Gaius and his brother were not related in blood to Augustus. They were his grandkids. I guess I should say someone related to him, whether they were his biological kids or not. These guys were his grandkids, not his kids, but they were sort of serving, in effect, as his sons. Anyway, sorry. I just wanted to slightly correct that. There's... Once again, I think the point still stands that I made earlier, which is it wasn't necessarily about being biologically related to Augustus, Drusus, Tiberius. They were not. It's about being familially related. It's just that Augustus is interesting that he never had these biological sons competing for this position. They were stepsons and adopted sons, grandsons, that sort of thing. And that's what Lucius and Gaius are. They're his grandsons, but also his potential heirs.
Fruitful, full of passive-aggressive language and diplomatic slights. The peace negotiation instead took a different turn when the Parthians' candidate Artabazus suddenly became ill and died, prompting the Roman hostage Tigranes IV to petition Augustus for a bid to take the Armenian throne. Augustus quickly ferried Tigranes off to Armenia with high hopes that it would resolve the situation, and Phraticles entered into more amiable negotiations with Augustus. Phraticles withdrew the Parthian army and agreed to recognize Tigranes IV on the condition that Tigranes' brothers were kept outside of Armenia. Phraticles also revealed Lollius to be a traitor who proceeded to take his own life.
Damn.
With the frontier seemingly
Okay, so maybe he wasn't better suited to lead the campaign.
in order. Gaius Caesar's letter reached Rome, where the Senate proclaimed him imperator for a 15th time for his bloodless victory. This would prove to be apprehensive, as the sudden ambush and death of Tigranes IV by unidentified barbarians sent the region spiraling back into a crisis. Succeeding Tigranes IV, the Roman nominee Ariobarzanes II was widely disliked by the Armenians, who rose in revolt against his coronation. The revolt of 2 CE was probably incensed by the Parthians and forced Gaius Caesar to cross the Euphrates into Armenia. His forces advanced to Artageria and laid siege, remaining there over the winter into 3 CE. The story of the siege is uncertain, as the primary sources have conflicting accounts. The Armenian commander, named Adon or Donis in different versions of the story, was allegedly loyal to either the old Armenian king or the Parthian king Phraticles, and would not surrender the city. In some accounts, he allegedly lured Gaius Caesar into negotiations to betray the city and its treasury to him, only to wound him in a double cross. Adon then either threw himself onto a pyre, fell on his sword, or retreated to the city for the siege.
Okay, a lot of conflicting stories here.
Depending on the author. The siege was long, and when the Romans finally took the city, they pulled down its walls to ensure it could not defend itself against them again. The sacking of Artageria ended the revolt, and the Romans installed Ariobarzanes II as their puppet ruler, only for him to suddenly die as well.
Jesus.
Fortunately, the Romans had another replacement waiting in the wings, the young Artabazus, who was crowned soon after. Unfortunately for Augustus's grandsons, their fate was to live similarly short lives to the Armenian successors. Lucius Caesar had set out for his first military post in Spain in 2 CE, only to suddenly fall ill and die during a stop along the coast at Massalia. Gaius Caesar, wounded during the siege of Artageria, also suffered from illness and infection afterwards. Cassius Dio says Gaius Caesar had never been of a particularly robust constitution and became delirious due to a fever. He sent a letter to his grandfather begging to also enter private life like Tiberius, to which Augustus reluctantly conceded.
At this point, Augustus is like, God damn it, I've got no one left. And of course, with Lucius, we'll see Gaius, there's a lot of suspicion of poisoning. That's what everyone always thinks, that if someone dies in a even slightly suspicious manner, they must have been poisoned. I don't think that's the case here. I think all these deaths are explainable, but just to let you know, some people do suspect poison in each one of these deaths.
In the interim, his chief military advisor, Quirinius, was appointed Legati Augusti Propraetori of Syria, replacing Varus, and began withdrawing the Roman army from Armenia as ailing Gaius Caesar boarded a ship bound for Rome. His condition quickly worsened, and he died on the 21st of February during a stop at Limyra in Lycia, much like his brother and Drusus before him. Rome once again entered a period of mourning. A state funeral was held, and
I mean, y'all, I've been talking about Augustus's issues with succession throughout this series. Now you can really see what I'm talking about. Drusus died, Lucius died, Gaius died. Tiberius is alive, but he's in self-exile, though, as I'm sure y'all can guess, he's gonna be eventually pulled back because Augustus really doesn't have many other options. You can see here, Augustus was really unlucky with succession, or, I mean, once again, if you believe some people think that, no, he wasn't unlucky with succession, that Livia was behind it all, poisoning everybody around him. I think that's often over-exaggerated. She was a bit of a schemer, that can't be denied. But once again, I do think these deaths are explainable without poison.
Rome once again entered a period of mourning. A state funeral was held, and Gaius's ashes were carried into the mausoleum of Augustus and placed alongside his brothers. Both boys' silver-gilt spears and shields were placed on display at the Curia Iulia. Augustus could not grieve, however, as Rome's next generation of military leaders had perished. He had to move quickly and looked to his stepson Tiberius, whom he adopted as his direct successor, with the requirement that Germanicus, Tiberius's son, be adopted in turn. Tiberius responded positively to this news, and in 4 CE he left his estate in Rhodes to return to public life, with his tribunician power restored.
So we see Tiberius dragged back into public life, and they say Germanicus, who I've been talking about, I believe, well, he was the son of Drusus, biological son of Drusus, but I think what they meant there is that I believe he was adopted by Tiberius after Drusus dies, right? So Tiberius is officially, well, okay, Tiberius is Germanicus's uncle, who then adopts him, right? So, either way, Germanicus, he's within the family.
Tiberius's comeback had come in the nick of time, as the Roman province of Germania was once more in turmoil. The province, in which the Romans had been constructing markets and other amenities for the past decade, now faced another mass revolt from Rome's former Germanic allies. Tiberius advanced to the border, where he was warmly greeted by the Evocati, the old veterans who had remained in service since his previous tenure, and then launched an aggressive campaign following Drusus's first expedition in 12 BCE. The Cananephates, Bructeri, Autori, and Cherusci were all quickly subdued, as Tiberius advanced over the Weser and to the source of the Lippe, where he established a new legionary fortress at Anrapen. The conflict lasted unusually late into December, with Tiberius possibly reaching as far east as Paderborn before returning briefly to Rome. The opening of 5 CE saw a similarly offensive stance, where Tiberius crossed the Elbe and subdued the Chauci, Langobardi, Semnones, and Hermanduri. Retiring for the winter, Tiberius broke new ground at Marksbreit and Carnuntum in preparation to continue further east, surpassing his brother Drusus with the conquest of the Marcomanni, who had moved to the region of the modern Czech Republic.
So Tiberius, it's really back and forth with him, right? I mean, beforehand it seemed like, oh, he's pretty good, he's a reliable politician general, and then he sends himself into self-exile, ruins his relationship with Augustus, but now Tiberius is back, and once again, he proves himself to be competent, right? You can say that about him, whatever else you think. At least at this time, he's competent, he does know what he's doing. Now, that relationship, I would say, is not fully mended with Augustus, but at this point, Augustus doesn't have a whole lot of other options.
Tiberius, however, would soon be forced to turn his attention away from Germania and back to the empire. In the Roman provinces of Illyricum and Dalmatia, public discontent with the Roman legate was about to boil over into the largest revolt Augustus would face. Next time, we'll face down the Great Illyrian Revolt, considered by the Romans to be their greatest threat since Hannibal himself. If you don't want to miss that and many other historical videos, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them.
Alright, and hey, make sure to do that on this channel as well. I thought this was going to be the entirety of the end of Augustus's reign, but no, we've still got years to go. And, I mean, I thought that because it's called the final years of Augustus, so, to be fair. But no, we still have more of Augustus here. And to be clear, I thought we were going to cover the rest, and then later in the series go back to things that had happened previously. But it seems that no, we're going to continue to follow along chronologically. Got the Great Illyrian Revolt, then Teutoburg, and then the death of Augustus, I guess is the most recent episode in the series. So there you go. So we'll be dealing with his death eventually. You've seen a lot of his succession crises. Augustus's struggle to find an heir. Well, he's got Tiberius, and Tiberius is going to end up being his successor. Maybe not the favorite, but that's how it ends up going. So if you guys ended up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below, and I'll give you access to years of exclusive content. With that, I hope you're all having a fantastic day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.